Okay. Oh god, the camera's gone mad. This is one of the things I hate. Oh, you're talking about nuclear explosions. 2 seconds on that. Of course there was going to be problems. Oh, crap. There we go. Let's just take that brightness down a bit. That's a bit fucking crazy. There we go. That's a little bit better. Ooh. Let's take that exposure down a bit. There we go. That's a bit more like it. That's a bit more. Alright. And I've still got no chat for whatever reason. Right, okay, let's just delete that one from there. I apologise for this. I've had to reset everything up and it's always the goddamn same. So if I get back into here, I should be able to just pick that, copy, and put it into here. God damn it. Oh, of course. Okay. And now it's not letting me paste that in. There we go. Let's try that. You blame Brexit. I blame Brexit as well. Let's see if we can get let's see if we can get that to come through on chat. Yay! We have chat. How about that? Holy fuck. And that image is very dark. Get that one more quick play with. We're nearly there. Did you miss anything? Only me kind of struggling with tech. You know, I'm only a technician by trade. So, of course. That's probably a bit better. There we go. There we go. Okay. Don't know what happened there. I think everything looks like it's fine now. It seems to be running at normal speed and all that kind of stuff. Not quite sure why that was going. Hello, John. Good to see you. My old mucker, John. I was pelting home the other week, and he just happened to be in Cambridge, and I had my headphones on, and I completely missed him. He was ringing me desperately. I didn't realise until I got home. Oh dear. Got the ambulance back. Ambience back. I thought the ambulance. I was like, oh my god, really? I've not quite got the settings right, but there you go. You blame the weather. I've been doing a lot of kind of altering of things with the computer and stuff. A few weeks ago, I bumped my computer up to 64 gig of memory and did a few bits and pieces, and I got an NVMe. I installed a new NVMe SSD into the computer to try and kind of have a separate system drive, and you know, there's a lot of setting up, and I hadn't got around to doing this just because that's just sort of how it is. You blame the Rand Corporation in conjunction with the Saucer people under the supervision of the reverse vampires. It sounds sensible to me. I'm going to just warm this thing up. There we go. That's a bit better. Look at it. Oh, God, I look at Donald Trump there, don't I? I'm not quite sure what's better. That or that. I look a little dead there, but it's probably a little less Trumpian. If we want to go for the full Trump, I've just got to have the kind of, you know, the prison outfit. Well, that's proving interesting, isn't it? Interesting times we live in at the moment. The Rand Corp, best badass corporation name ever. And terrible all the technical light switches and Pornhub are this. So the thing is, stuff like this I can usually figure it out over time. It's just doing it live is a little bit trickier. Just because there's the pressure on you to do it, to get it right and all that kind of stuff in a fast time. What with the astrophotography I've been doing, that's been the tricky thing, because that is super frigging complicated when it comes. Well, I say that it's not really. It's just there's a lot of things that you have to sort of plug in together. Not least the physical stuff, but the software stuff has to kind of all work, which is why I'm having problems with the guiding scope. Despite me having spent a couple of evenings trying to work it, and despite the assurances of people on YouTube videos, it's so easy. All you do is like clunk, 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 and it works. It's like, oh god, don't mess about with light switches and Pornhub till you're competent to operate blinds and curtains. Yes. That is sage advice, Grob. Very sage advice. Dear, oh dear. But yeah, I mean, talking computers, I just picked this thing up. Got this Lenovo P50, and I have to say, if you're after a good laptop, this is an 8-year-old laptop, so it's about 250 to 350 quid. It's built like a brick shithouse. You could beat a whale to death with it without it interrupting the boot up sequence. It's very expandable. You can put 2 NVMe's in here plus a regular SSD and all that kind of stuff, and it can be expanded up to 64 gig of memory. And it's relatively robust. It can survive a bit of damp and all that kind of thing. But I got that specifically for the astrophotography, because every time I go out with a computer and stuff now, because I've got an Astrocam, I have to have it attached to a computer, and I was always kind of worried about the computer, with damp and stuff like that. That thing can take it. It's quite remarkable. Very, very underrated by laptop by anyone who hasn't used one, essentially. It's a very, very, very good. You dislike the Lenovo's laptops. Some of the Lenovo stuff is not so great. The ThinkPad, is it ThinkPad? No, IdeaPad and that kind of stuff are not so good. They are more your regular kind of users sort of level laptop. Those things, the ThinkPads, are really, really, really good. They really are. I specifically got it because I knew that it was a little bit more robust with like kind of damp in the air and things like that, because when you got it outside, there's potentially dew and things like that coming down. So yeah, it's really good. I've bumped it up to 32 gig already. I'm going to be getting some extra storage for it and all that kind of stuff. I could literally edit videos and stuff like that if you were making them, Glenn. Yes, I know. I've been very, very slow on that kind of thing. Dear, oh dear. I doubt Donald Trump will ever see the inside of a prison cell, but it's going to be interesting. It's a 50-50 prospect at the moment. I suspect what will happen with him is they will convict him, and they will probably come to a deal where he just fucks off and is made to be quiet. I suspect people just more want him out of the way, if you know what I mean. Not that that's the reason for why he's being prosecuted, because the reasons are very legitimate. When you look at the charges, it's incredibly serious. And from what I understand, these guys wouldn't, go for it unless they were really fucking sure that they had a case. And why would you with someone like him? Because it's incredibly provocative. Even with all the evidence that's against him, and him being on tape kind of going, yeah, I did it, would you like to see these like state secrets? Oh, crazy. It's absolutely crazy. That laptop takes me back to the days in field sales for various IT companies. Yeah, it's a bit retro. I mean, like I say, it's a big boy. I mean, look how thick that damn thing is. That's by today's standards, and it's heavy. It's heavy. You wouldn't want to be carrying it around too much, if you know what I mean. But good and solid. But that's what I like with the laptop. I don't like these ones that feel like you can go like that and it will flex. That thing, God no, it's solid. Realised the film Wrong Turn is 20 years old this year. I feel old. It's funny, you sort of look back on stuff and, kind of like films of your lifetime and stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, I remember when the original Star Wars came out, for God's sake, for that Freaky Friday, one of the early Jodie Foster films, the Disney film. Speaking of which, there's a segue. Oh, it's a very natural segue, actually. Yeah. The thing with Disney at the moment, at least it's suspected to be Disney, the French Connection. There seems to have been basically on the streaming version of the film seems to have been censored, particularly for one moment. As far as I'm aware, it's just the one moment. It's about 10 minutes in, and you've got the two guys talking about, but they're just having a bit back and forth. And Roy Scheider's character basically says, never trust a N-word. And I won't say it just because I don't like saying that word. I think it's A, I don't have any business saying it, and B, I just don't like it. It's a very ugly word. And it's all kind of within character for these for these two characters. It's a very, very brief moment. It's sort of in part adds a bit of texture to kind of like, who these characters are and the sort of time that they were in. It wasn't considered quite as tough a moment, although apparently he did not like saying it at all. He had a real problem with kind of like saying that line. He had to sort of suck it up and do it. And Disney, allegedly Disney, they're sort of, from what I understand, they sort of denied it. They've said, like, this is the version that we were supplied with. It's not something that we've done. It's just something that happened to kind of happen. And one kind of wonders, it's like, how the fuck does that even happen? how does that even happen? Is that even possible? It doesn't sound like an accident to me. It does sound much more like something that Disney would be much more prone to doing, because these big corporations don't really have an awful lot of love for the art, as far as I'm concerned. They're all too willing to want to change things in the original films, and I'm not even talking about the whole kind of like with race swapping within the kind of remakes of the things like The Little Mermaid and stuff like that, the live action films, which I've got no shits to give about that. It's a different version. Do it how you want, But when it comes to stuff like this, particularly because they took over Fox and all that sort of stuff, and French Connection was a Fox film, the one thing that everybody was really, really worried about was very much that they would revisit these things and then kind of start tinkering with them to make them more corporate friendly. And this is always going to be a problem, especially with something like Disney, because Disney is fucking huge. And they have this image that they have to sustain, and the films are sort of incidental, in my opinion, to them. They're not the core of what the company is, what they do now. That is something that it's what they do, but it's not really that important to them in the same way it would be to people who kind of love these things. They're an asset, that's pretty much what they are. It's like, I don't know, a mechanic caring about a spanner. It's a tool for the job. And in some respects, that moment, although it's just a very small moment, you could argue it either way as to how important it is. But there is a real kind of concern about sort of like the preservation of the films, because making a change like that does have the slightest effect on the film to some extent or another. And that's, I mean, I watched it again yesterday, The French Connection, and it's a great film. It's a great film. And I kind of look at the situation as much as being that it's a constant chipping away. However important you think that moment is this chipping away at the film and kind of how the characters are presented and all that kind of stuff. It's rather disturbing because we are getting this sort of erosion, this sort of revisionist sort of approach to these films. Now this is offensive, so we can't have that. We've had it with Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, and some other films along the way that have been. There's a feeling by the studios that we own the rights, therefore we can do what we want with them, and legally that's true, but I think morally that is becoming a bit of a problem. Not that it's anything new, and I always say it is. A lot of this stuff, it's very, very rarely a new thing. But now, of course, the difference is that with physical media becoming one of those things that's under threat, we might not have it around for too many more years. French Connection is a decent film in my book. Yeah, it's a very good film. It's a weird ending, but it's actually I always thought it was sort of hacked off at the end. Because it does end up with that very, very cliche kind of, that's a cliche, I'd say almost lazy sort of thing where they have the kind of like the photo of the person and what happened to him, did 20 years in jail, got away, and then become a banker or something like that. But yeah, we're going to eventually, if the corporations and the likes have their way, we'll eventually lose physical media and all that kind of stuff, and it will mean that every piece of film art, will be subject to the whim of the corporations or the hosts that are hosting it, or holding it, and it's a real problem. It's a real problem. The Dam Busters, as Grob points out, there's a dog, there's Black Labrador in it, whose name is the N-word. And yes, if you're making a film these days, that would probably be pretty unacceptable. Back in the day, it was. I don't think it was done with the same kind of intent. I don't think there wasn't. The use of that word wasn't intended to be quite as brutal, regardless of what the actual effect of it was. And I'm glad to see that we don't do that, generally speaking. Prefer to live in a world that doesn't use that word as much as possible. But yes, basically slicing those things out, that kind of stuff, just changes so much within the film and kind of certain aspects of the film, certain texture to the film, historical context to the film. That yes, you can argue that in that case, it's not a very pleasant thing. It doesn't really change the film that much. But I would argue that it's just the slippery slope. You can certainly kind of make a convincing enough argument that shouldn't be in a film. But where does that stop? Where does that argument stop? As time changes, are we going to be hacking more and more bits and pieces out as we go along? And there is an argument to say that people, generally speaking, understand that there is a historical context to a film. And I think partly it's just trying to think of the best way to put it. Yeah, one of the things about all of this kind of when you undoubtedly get people who are not as media literate as maybe people should be. We're surrounded by media, and I think this is one of the biggest social problems we have these days, particularly when it comes to social media and all that kind of stuff, is people aren't media literate. understanding films and stories and all that kind of stuff is one part of how we understand communication in general. And there's this weird kind of divorcing of what we do online in social media and stuff like that, how we understand films and all that kind of thing, how we understand stories, understanding that the values of today were not the values of yesterday. And hiding all that stuff I don't think is a very good thing. I think it's a very dangerous thing, to be honest with you, because apart from anything else, understanding that, this is where we came from, I think is kind of important part of life, really. I think there's an importance to being able to understand that kind of like, things were different back in the day. But when you were back in the day, things felt like they were in an ideal place, or kind of like going towards an ideal place. But you look at it a little bit further back and you sort of go, well, that was awful. But you also get the reverse of that with the people, the good old days people. Now, back in my day, we didn't have anything like this. And you sort of go, bollocks, didn't you? It's a fascinating sort of subject. I'm actually started writing something about it. I started last night, and just sort of trying to get my head around kind of like how to approach that kind of stuff. It's You have to leave the book Huckleberry Finn untouched. Fair enough. For you rewrote the TV shows and comics to the kids, but the original must remain in place. Yeah, and I think that is kind of important. I mean, when you're talking about something like Birth of a Nation, for instance. And most people would absolutely kind of like tell you that the importance of the film is not in the message. In fact, the message is very, very brutally horrible. But understanding that is some people's point of view is kind of important as well. But you also sort of like have to understand that film was essentially a recruitment tool for the KKK for many decades. The world's a complicated place. Media education is such an important part of education that gets utterly sort of brushed over. Film studies and TV and film studies, that kind of stuff, media studies, I think should be something that you're doing from primary school. Learning all that kind of stuff. How to, I always thought it was a very po-faced way of putting it. How to read a movie. It's a book. It kind of teaches you about sort of film theory and all that sort of stuff. And I always thought it was a bit like very stuck up its own arse in using a name like that. But I've come to sort of appreciate what it is. I'm trying to say. John says French Sea is such an important film. The film shows a certain part of NYC history. It's all about context. It's almost a historical document, for goodness sake. And it's actually based on some real people as well, and a real case. Or it's not quite a documentary, but yeah. Never understood this knack for cutting out moments of bigotry from art. If you want to show how society was racist once upon a time, don't censor those bits out, you fools. And how it is still to, these problems are ongoing. The idea that that's what's going to turn somebody into a nasty little racist is not, does not jive with me somehow. Oh dear. Revenge of the Nerds ends up with a hero effectively raping his crush. That is a dodgy film. It's a very cringe moment. I do remember watching that when it came out on VHS, and it's like, you sort of look at it now. Mind you, most of those, the things like Porky's and things like that, it's all a bit ooh. Surprising when ITV showed John Wayne films Cowboys a few years back when they left all the N-words in but cut out all the phrase, oh god, yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it? If it's that, I'm much more for the whole kind of approach of going, right, okay, put a primer at the beginning of the film that sort of explains that this is what this film was in its context, kind of like who wrote it, why they wrote it that way, all that kind of stuff. I think that's a much better way of doing it. I think Gone with the Wind, when they did the primer for it at the beginning of that, actually it was very interesting because there was a lot of historical context put into it. So you understood, kind of things about the making of, the time it was made, who wrote the book, and all that kind of stuff, and the problems, why people, kind of look at it in as being a problematic thing, but leave the film intact. And it's the same with Birth of a Nation. It has the same kind of thing. You kind of like look at, I don't know, I've got one I've showed you before, which is Monkey. It's like the entire series. Some people would look at that and think, because of the English translation, that it's a problem. Though the main actor really didn't have a problem with the voices, apparently he quite liked them. Dear. Love Thy Neighbour should never be repeated on TV, but people should have the right to watch the garbage on DVD at home. I mean, Love Thy Neighbour, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's the sort of thing that would sit well with a modern audience, but it should be available. I don't think any TV company would really benefit from necessarily screening that again. I think particularly as historically, some people kind of took it as an endorsement of those kind of things, but it should be available, and it should. This stuff should absolutely be kind of available to get hold of. It should be archived. It should be looked after. When it comes to something like The French Connection, the film is not just a classic. It's certainly not got really kind of a bad intent on that sort of front. It was sort of a portrait of the time, apart from anything else, and cops were like that. But yeah, Love Thy Neighbour was hilariously funny. Yeah. I mean, it had its moments and stuff like that, and it was, it was supposed to kind of be a parody. It wasn't supposed to be kind of like that. It wasn't supposed to be behind the character in that film, in that series. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't get away with making it these days, and to be honest, I don't think many people would understand it these days, but like I say, always should be kind of around. It should be available. Love Thy Neighbour is as funny as as On the Buses and Hemorrhoids. On the Buses is... God, I mean, I can't... I always struggle with stuff like Carry On films and things like that. I don't think there's always been something kind of uncomfortable about it. Not quite sure why. So why or how does Tarantino get away with it, the N-word? That is, does he though? He's been criticised on many occasions about that. I don't know. There's a good chance that his work will be kind of, suppressed in the future because of that. We're just not there yet. Considering how innocuous the N-word use in The French Connection is, it's astounding that, especially because Disney own Miramax. It was Miramax, wasn't it? Which is most of Tarantino's movies. Who knows? The thing is, they've owned that company for a very, very long time, and they haven't interfered with it. I have in the past said I'd be surprised if they really kind of, feel the need to mess around too much with films, because they have these other labels, these other outlets for them, all that kind of stuff. Oh, sorry, just hit the mic. They have all these other outlets for them. So they don't necessarily have to have it kind of like with Disney on the front in the credits, because they can have it via the other outlets. But yeah, one wonders if that's sort of changing. One also wonders whether or not it was just an accident, and they did indeed pick up a kind of slightly toned down version of the film. It's very hard. It's very hard to tell. Love Thy Neighbour was No, In Sickness in Health by Miles. Alf Garnett is far better written. Yeah, Alf Garnett was. I actually met Warren Mitchell. Um, yeah, he was a really nice guy. Although he kind of like telling us about he was a bit of a bastard back in those days because he thought it was hot shit. He says he really regretted that. Which is a bit of a life lesson for you. It's like, yeah, you're going to be at the top one day, but you are eventually likely to come back down again. I've only seen one Carry On film, Up the Khyber, pretty funny, but I hear that's a lot of the later ones are pure direct. Yes, they got worse as they went along because it was the same jokes again and again and again. They were all right. They just I think by today's standards they feel uncomfortable, and I think that in its own right is enough of a censorship thing anyway. Sensibilities have changed, generally speaking. So a lot of the sort of stuff that goes on in those films does feel in a non-comedic way very uncomfortable by today's standards, and that's okay. I think it's okay for people to kind of look at that stuff and go, I don't think that's appropriate. That should. But the censorship of it is, this is what those movies were, and they were kind of important in British cinema in some respects. I will never say that they were masterpieces by any means, but they are a very important part of British culture. Actually, kind of an interesting sort of reflection of how British cinema, especially in the face of the potential like the BBFC and all that kind of stuff, didn't really allow Britain to grow much of a kind of art house or a sort of serious cinema scene. Because every time we did something serious, the BBFC would be like, oh no, you can't have that, and they would vandalise a lot of that stuff. BBFC back in the day particularly were pretty bad. Were pretty bad for that kind of stuff. So we ended up with a lot of stuff like, the Carry On films, things like that, which were mind-bogglingly popular at the time. It's just sort of end of the pier kind of seaside postcard kind of humour. They do go down in quality. Yeah, it's a wild mix. There were some genuine. There was some I would kind of watch if it happened to be on. I don't think I'd ever sort of chase any of those films out. Fawlty Towers has stuff they feel they ought to censor, but the joke works and is relevant. I think Fawlty Towers has had some sort of flack thrown in its direction, mostly just because you've got like Andrew Sachs's character is essentially kind of like considered by some to be a bit inappropriate because it's kind of a blackface type thing. Well, he's not black, but there is that sort of playing the foreigner, a foolish foreigner type thing. But Basil Fawlty is much more clearly not a hero. He is a buffoon, an absolute buffoon. I don't think you have to be a particularly sophisticated viewer to go that he's not the hero. He's the butt of the joke. So generally speaking, the kind of stuff that he kind of puts out there when he does say the inappropriate stuff, it's just you go, God, he's such an idiot, and he gets his own, by the end of it. Are they going to do the same censoring to Shaun of the Dead? Fans will know which scene I'm referring to. I'm trying to think which scene you're referring to on that one. Unless it's it's been so many years since I've watched it, but I don't know if I can say that. But hopefully not. Because I think certainly in that context it was clearly a comedy moment, and that's it. Just because he is what he is, he's just being that sort of I don't know, sort of. I don't know how to describe it. There you go. Don't think blackface or any colourface should be done today. No, and we don't need to. That's the thing. We've sort of mostly. I think I'd like to think that we've grown past a lot of that sort of stuff. It's not always the case. You just have to look at some of the political movements in the world today. There's pretty good examples of that, particularly in America at the moment. which is a little bit concerning. Um, but yeah. Do you like Bauhaus, Glenn? I don't know that. Carry On Films set me up for disappointment later in life as breasts don't make a honk honk noise in real life. Don't make a honk honk, but they can get you a bit of a... When Furman defended banning Texas Chainsaw Massacre, an MP pointed out Hammer films were gory, apparently stated, but they were British. Oh, it stated that they were British, yeah. Censorship has never worked, has it? It's... it can work in some respects, but one of the biggest side effects is it always makes anything like that much more desirable. But absolutely, Furman really hated the kind of horror that was coming from over in the States. I would say with the Texas Chainsaw, there is an air of menace about it that's not in the Hammer films. The Hammer films were very... very quaint in comparison, for the most part, compared to something like Texas Chainsaw. Texas Chainsaw feels visceral, and that's one of the problems that they actually had with it. It's like there was nothing to really cut. It was just the entire film was drenched in this kind of atmosphere that really kind of... cutting out a little bit of gore wouldn't do. And not that there was much gore. I mean, you just think about that sort of scene where she goes into the kitchen and Leatherface grabs her, hooks her on the meat hook. Look at it frame for frame. There's nothing there. There's nothing to cut unless you cut the entire piece. In which case, there's no movie left once you've done all that. It's an incredibly effective work of just atmosphere. That's the thing with that film. And there's a few that are like that. Driller Killer, I think, is a film that is built on atmosphere. There's this sort of feeling of dread and hopelessness throughout that film that can't be cut out. You can cut out the bit with the drill. Well, that's the least of your worries. Hammer films were never as psychologically as edgy as TCM, yeah, I would tend to agree. Once went to a works fancy dress party as a black and white minstrel. Oh my god, Simon. Wow. Oh, okay. Hello, Kerry. Coming and going. Not a problem. You do what you need to do. Hello, everyone. I heard of the Carry On films, but never seen one. I think it depends on whether or not you're interested in British cinema. Basically, I mean, they were very much the mainstream kind of thing in British cinema. They were the American Pie kind of movies, but a British institution version. It was various different ones as well. It was like On the Buses and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the TV series that sort of ended up as feature films, that kind of stuff, because they knew they were going to be popular, and they're dirt cheap to make as well. But yeah, if you're interested in sort of certain aspects of mainstream British cinema in the 60s and 70s, then yeah, check out a couple of Carry On films. I'm sure somebody could suggest the best ones. I don't really have a position on that. Have a good one, Kerry, yeah. TCM is basically Evil Dead, but with no let-up or comedic catharsis. No, yeah, that's not a bad description. Both films are very basic. They're not complicated stories, not complex in the slightest. But they are just masterfully built to kind of just have this atmosphere, kind of cloying atmosphere. And Texas Chainsaw is one of those films I tend to revisit like once a year, on the hottest day of the year, because it's one of those, when you've got that desperate heat, like kind of like that sort of late August, early October kind of end of summer heat, which is just, it's humid, it's uncomfortable, it's like takes your breath away. And a film like Texas Chainsaw is just perfect, because it is one of those films. It's like the cinematic equivalent of the hottest, sweatiest day that you can imagine. It's a very tactile film in that kind of respect. There's only a few films that are kind of like that for me. Surprised you can get through. Surprised you can get uncut Cannibal Holocaust. Well, you can't get uncut in Britain. It is still slightly cut. For the one scene that, even years ago I'd kind of said that it's going to be the difficult one, which is the Cotamundi. Aside from that death, the rest of it was not that challenging to put in. That is a very tough film as well. It's much to do with the fact that kind of the way it's made was very unusual at the time. It's still very, very powerful. It's still a very powerful film, and a surprisingly smart film as well. It's not all about it's not all about the gore. I thought it was uncut these days. Don't care much for it myself. I'm vegetarian about it. You can get it uncut in plenty of other places other than the UK, but it's that one, and that falls under the Cinematographic Act animals part, because it is, the Cotamundi is particularly brutal, the way they killed it, and it's clear that the animal was suffering. Where with most of the others, it's pretty much as clean a kill as you're going to get, even in a slaughterhouse. Carry On Screaming should be the main one to watch for a horror fan, along with Camping, Doctor, Henry and Dick. Yeah, sounds like a good selection. Don't see the similarities between Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, except for the early set design. The similarities, for me, although the tone is very different, the similarity is basically in the kind of the way that they're filmed is in terms of kind of like the guerrilla nature of the filmmaking, has a texture of its own, but they're both very, very simple stories that kind of build up tension in the same kind of way. It's a fairly steady build up. They're not on the face similar films, but most of that is down to the fact that Evil Dead kind of is very tongue-in-cheek. I don't think it's not a film with a bad bone in its body anyway. Texas Chainsaw is bad right the way through. It is a mean film. In a good way. It's supposed to be kind of scary, supposed to be terrifying. But they're both very low budget films made by people who were kind of relatively inexperienced, and made under very tough circumstances. So yeah, no one ever talks about To the Devil or Daughter. Anyone know why that's a problem? I don't, I'm afraid. But I tend to agree with you, Byron, that TCM feels too real, ED is pure fantasy. But I think at the heart of the kind of filmmaking it's fairly similar. And partly that just becomes because low budget filmmaking, like I say, has a texture of its own. It's kind of fun to see kind of how that sort of gets twisted in one way or another. But there is something about the inventiveness and to some degree, kind of like trying to work your way around problems that you can't afford to throw money at, which is, that's the studio's way of dealing with things, is to just go, right, okay, well, we'll CG the fuck out of it, these days that would be the case, or we'll just kind of throw shit tons of money at it and make the problem go away. I'm loath to say that something like CG and stuff like that is a lazy man's kind of way of doing it, because I don't think it is. It is an art form in its own right. But there is something about kind of having something happen in camera which is a bit more magical to me. And I think you can always tell when it's CG, and I think that's always going to be the case to an extent. I think it's an invaluable tool, but it's lent on too much. And one of the biggest problems with that, which makes it a big difference between that, I mean, you see low budget films that are using CG and that kind of stuff, and all the ideas go in, everything goes in, all the fantastic stuff that they're sort of thinking about, or sounds great on paper, looks great in their head, and all that kind of stuff. And there's something about kind of like meeting those challenges where you sort of go, right, okay, well, I can't do this, what can we do? Which really sort of honed a film, certainly, in terms of kind of special effects and things like that. But also, it goes right down to the kind of editing and to the direction and all of those kind of things. All of those elements that make up a film were crafted by coming up against a brick wall and figuring out how the hell you're going to climb over it. Or do you climb over it? Do you go around that wall? And sometimes the ideas sort of works better. I mean, Jaws is the good example that the Bruce, the shark, the mechanical shark, wasn't working. So a lot of the film had to be crafted around the approached by not having the shark visible. Because it would have been a very different film if you'd seen that shark from moment one. See, The Wicker Man is coming back to the cinema for its 50th anniversary. Are you going to go see it on the big screen? I don't much like going to the cinema these days, I have to admit. I might make an exception for that if it happens to come on around here. I have to admit, I've just completely grown cold to the idea of going to the cinema these days. I find it unpleasant. And partly that's because, mostly, I would say, it's because the multiplex experience is pretty shit, in my opinion. It's stressful because you never know what you're actually walking into, who's going to be in there, are they going to behave, are they going to be considerate, are they going to sit there with their mobile phones a few rows ahead of you, kind of distracting you, are they going to be yakking at the back of the auditorium. Ugh. And it just makes me want to go into a kill crazy. I do not want to become one of those headline guys. Just man kills entire audience in cinema with a can of popcorn. Ah, dear. I remember that. Oh, yeah. TCM is 50 years old now and it still tops the charts of greatest horror films ever made, along with The Shining, Jaws. Do you think there are any modern horror that has staying power? I'd say yes. It's just that we haven't really grown to appreciate some of them. And whatever I suggest is probably going to be controversial, because there's various things that sort of people feel very strongly about that. I think there is some absolutely amazing modern horror stuff. I love the Suspiria remake. I think that's a really, really good film, and different enough that I'd say its only flaw is it's got the same name as the original. I think it would be a lot more better regarded, but it wouldn't be as well known had it gone by a different name. Things like Hereditary and Midsummer, The Witch. To some extent, films like was it Don't Breathe? Was it Don't Breathe? The one where they had to stay really, really, really quiet because of the monsters around and all that kind of stuff. I think there's some great horror films out there. There really are. It's just that they tend to get sort of buried under a lot of franchise stuff, and as snobbish as it sounds, and I hate having to say it like this, people have been kind of lulled into accepting really kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to movies in particular, but it's not isolated to movies. It can be TV and just stories in general, all that kind of stuff. People get lulled into kind of thinking that that's the stuff which is good. I mean, as much as I like the Marvel, at least the first, was it 3 phases, whatever it was. I haven't followed it since, but that's all. That is kind of like, that's what's good with cinema. That's everything. That's the be all and the end all. That any film that you have to sit down and sort of think about, or kind of maybe even watch 2 or 3 times. Films that don't just kind of rattle keys in front of your face and go, ooh, it distract you for 2.5 hours, whatever. I think people have gotten out of the habit of being able to watch that sort of stuff, and I think if you look back at like classic films from the 60s and the 70s in particular, even in our genre, things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, either version of that, a longer, slower film, slower plot, a lot more character going on, that kind of stuff. And people have a lot less time for that these days. Attention spans have been kind of whittled right down. And that's how corporations want it. They want you to sort of consume and throw away. Which, going back to the physical media kind of stuff, they want you, when you do like kind of remakes and stuff like that, they want you to forget the original even existed. And that has been the case. I think it was with The Thing, when the reimagining prequel, whatever the fuck it was, version came out. That it became very hard for a while to actually get hold of the original. And that's a problem, because they want to sort of shuffle this stuff away. So, no, don't worry about that. Remakes are not new, ever, by any means. Since cinema has existed, remakes have abounded. It's like somebody made the first movie, and it's like, a few years later, they remade it. There's kind of like various reasons why, and not least that the film stock wouldn't have survived in some respects. But Wizard of Oz is a good example. It's like I think the famous one that everybody knows was either the second or the third version, I think. People don't realise that all the time. I think Brad Anderson's Session 9 will eventually find its audience. Well, I hope so. See, the thing is, a lot of this stuff, I think when it comes to all these kind of new ones, the new horrors, or new films in general, that are good, they tend to have a smaller audience. It takes a little while for the audience to really sort of curate that and look after it and build it up. And very few people sort of shout from the rooftops, and there's all too many people who just go, it was a boring film. And I will always say that I have no problem with the film being boring, as long as it's being boring for a damn good reason. It doesn't have to be exciting, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the lack of really sort of kind of care that studios and stuff like that have for films, they do sequels and try to get rid of the originals, all that kind of stuff. There's a huge section of cinematographic history that went away, for a couple of reasons. First off, the studios just didn't want to store the films, so they were quite happy to get rid of them. Didn't want to have to look after them, and with the old nitrate stock, it was not a big surprise, because those things tended to explode. Almost literally, they would just self-combust. But they did a whole kind of wholesale sort of destruction of it. The BBC did it with a lot of their recordings. They just kept them for a few years and then got rid of them, recycled them, destroyed them. Which is why piracy is actually a good thing, because the reason I've got a lot of stuff these days is because somebody held back on returning the tapes, or have copied it, or done something like that. Yeah. It's really a shame that general public has lost appreciation for cinema in general, because it's not only diminished the theatre-going experience, it's led to a preponderance of bad cinema. I wouldn't feel too pessimistic. There is still good cinema out there. There's still coming out, still some great filmmakers. A lot of people who are passionate about filmmaking, stuff like John here, does all that kind of stuff, and just being around him when he's talking about that stuff is quite something. It makes me feel like a miserable old cunt. But he's incredibly enthusiastic, incredibly knowledgeable about all that kind of stuff. As long as people like him and people who appreciate that kind of stuff, like us here, are around, then this stuff will continue to be able to be made. But it will always be outside of the mainstream. But you got to do as much as you can to really sort of build up other people into that kind of stuff. I think film studies and media studies should be, like I say, something that's taught from a fairly early age, because I think it's good for our artistic future, and in terms of the kind of audiences we build. And we definitely, I think, need that sort of counteraction between from what the studios kind of would like us to be, which is passive observers. We go and we spend our 20 quid, and then we come out at the other end, and it's like taking a slice of cucumber. It's like it's there for a minute, then it's pretty much evaporated after. It's just there's no aftertaste to it. What a weird analogy. Glad so many agree. Great modern horror. Cheers, Adam. Working on the next one at the moment. Yeah. Session 9 may have been the original elevated horror film, but in that nothing happens in a non-horror film. Non-horror fans can blow smoke up his arse and say, see, horror films can be more than slashes, which is not a bad thing to say. I think horror comes in many different forms. It's not all about blood and guts. And irony is something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is more of a psychological film than it is a slasher of any kind. Because it spends literally about 90% of the film is them kind of bitching at each other, and Franklin kind of getting rolled down hills on his fucking wheelchair. But it's okay for horror to be something other than just blood and guts. In fact, I think confining horror to being blood and guts, at least in kind of like that's what your expectation is very, very limiting. And I think that's why I kind of appreciate films like Midsummer, which is a very divisive film. There's a lot of people who really don't think that much of the film. I think it's a bit pretentious, or it's kind of with this or that or the other, but it's I'm not even sure that the film is 100% successful in what it's trying to do, but it has an interesting kind of perspective going on, which it's something I kind of appreciate. Yes, it's slow. You could definitely argue that it's a dull film compared to a lot of what people would expect from a horror film. But I'm happy to have it in my collection, and I will be watching it again, probably several times over. I think the same could be said about Hereditary as well. It has the same kind of vibe. Very slow and cloying kind of atmosphere. There's always something slightly wrong. It's kind of I think that's what I like about it. It's like it gives you this picture. It's like, what is wrong with this picture? Where there's something wrong here, and you're sort of desperately trying to find out what it is, so you can identify the threat almost. It's kind of cool in that respect. Midsummer I thought was a bit of a missed opportunity. I can totally understand why people can feel like that. I don't even know, to be honest, whether or not I feel slightly that it is a missed opportunity. But there is something about that film which kind of I find gloriously unsettling. And maybe for me that's enough. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and argue that it's a perfect film and you're shit for not liking it. I can totally understand why people might find it a little bit of a failure in some respects, but I think it's an interesting film, and I'm glad it exists because it's like somebody's actually trying, when it comes to this sort of stuff. It's no Lord of Salem. Oh God. See, this is a weird thing. It's like, I don't know. Second Sight continued to release fantastic physical media box sets, classics like TCM, and more recent gems like Session 9 and The Witch. Hopefully Hereditary and It Follows get releases also. Hopefully. I mean, I know I'm kind of like the retro horror guy, but I think there's plenty of pretty well made horror films that are out. It tends to be just trying to find them, because especially these days the horror genre doesn't really get an awful lot of love. It's not up front as it was back in like the 80s and stuff like that. But certainly finding plenty of films which are made with artistic intent as much as anything. There's a real tangible sense that these films are trying to be good storytelling as much as anything. Glenn, you're a retro horror guy who needs to watch a lot more from Melville. Okay. Midsommar and Hereditary and all their ilk, 2 hours of nothing with one random jump or you're scared does not a good film make. I don't think necessarily. I mean, it does have a couple of jumpier scares, but that's not what those films were for me. They are kind of like a twisted sort of dark world that these things are set in. Ironically, for Midsommar, which is like kind of about a place that's always perpetually in daylight in the summer. There's an atmosphere to the world, and the kind of the characters that inhabit it. It's very slow. It's very low key. And I've always found the kind of like, yes, there's a couple of bits where it's like little spikes of horror, but I like the fact that when it happens, it is, at least I found it, to be properly shocking. It was less about it was less about kind of like just being gory for gory's sake. There's this sort of climax of gore, essentially, that of horror, of actual horror, not gore. And it doesn't, because it's a horror film, it doesn't look away from the gore. But that's not the point of it. It's kind of these things that happen that are astonishingly brutal, but quite small. Like with Hereditary, when the head, you finally kind of like see what happened to the girl. I remember sitting in the cinema watching that, and it's like kind of, oh my God, they actually showed that. And it's not particularly because it's an astonishingly gory piece. It's just like it's this moment, No judgment at all. Just my opinion. But elevated horror films just need new marketing technique. Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, you take the horror out of The Changeling. It's about grief or one mystical domestic abuse. Yeah, and that's the thing. Good horror for me. For some people, good horror is just gore and slapstick, sort of blood and guts, that kind of stuff. For me, good horror is about sort of like sort of psychological aspect of what world we're looking at, whose eyes we're looking at this world through, and intent. And it doesn't always have to make sense, I mean, when I look at something like Jess Franco's films and things like that, not necessarily the horror, but you look at something like Venus in Furs, for instance. There's something about those worlds that are much more interesting. But when it comes to kind of like a lot of horror films, it's anybody who's sat through all of my Video Nasties stuff, the amount of times that you sort of come across some sort of social messaging within the film, which is actually there. You know, I mean, I would never I try not to bring it up unless there's good evidence for it. Like with the Cannibal Man and things like that. Stuff that's in Cannibal Holocaust is, well documented. That kind of stuff. I find that more fascinating, but horror has a almost unique kind of license to be able to do some fascinating stuff to sort of address issues and ideas and societal problems, and it can do it, controversial ones particularly, and it can do it because it's almost like sort of it's cloaking. It's a sort of stealth kind of way of approaching these things. It's not as obvious, and certainly with like the Cannibal Man, when it was like Franco's government and all that kind of stuff in Spain, a lot of the issues that were kind of woven into that movie were stuff that couldn't be up front. So it was all sort of hidden in these kind of metaphors, these horror metaphors. Did you guys know that Mike Judge based Beavis and Butthead and Beavis and Butthead on The Hitchhiker? Did you really? Okay. I do like zombie films for that end of the world feeling, but I'm not all that interested in gore per se. I don't mind a bit of slapstick gore. I love the Evil Dead films. Dawn of the Dead has a lot of that. It also has its political kind of end and that sort of thing. I've got no problem with gore. Films just being about that sort of stuff, as long as they're fun. It's the ones that do it and are kind of mean-spirited about it. It's one of the things I find with Rob Zombie's stuff is there's a rather weird sense of humour to it, if it even exists, really. I don't think I share the same kind of sense of humour as Rob Zombie. I really, 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 really want to love one of his movies. I think, was it Lords of Salem was actually probably the most interesting one of the lot for me. House of 1,000 Corpses I thought was so derivative. It was... honestly, I waited for the longest time to watch that film, and then when I did, it was like kind of like... But there you go. Can't win them all. The horror film has always been a projection screen for society to project its fears onto. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. You know, when it's done right. It's not always the case that that's what it is. But particularly when you've got something, ideas and subject matter which is controversial, divisive, difficult to sort of express without people dismissing, then there's certain things that a horror film can do that a regular film can't. Human Experiment is probably quite a good example of that. It's a very feminist film, funny enough, for a women in prison film. And I know it is, because when you start looking into it, you look into it closer, you see certain aspects, certain clues within the film that actually kind of point in that direction. So there is an attempt to do that. How well it does it, that's another matter. Rob Zombie honestly changed my life. I saw the first 10 minutes of The Monsters and realised I was wasting my one and only lifetime. I never did something more interesting. I don't know what it is with him. I don't want to dislike the guy, and I sure as hell don't want to really kind of constantly rip on him. And he's got his fans. As long as he's happy with that, fine. But I don't think his films will ever be for me, if you know what I mean. Going to really take my time with this beer tonight. Be getting warm in a minute. Ah, dear. What does elevated horror mean? Admitted not heard this term before. For me, elevated horror is horror that actually is trying to kind of do something above and beyond just be a fright fest. Which, again, legitimate enough, but more high-minded sort of thing. You could argue, certain Cronenberg films, for instance, something like Videodrome would be, in my opinion, an elevated horror, because it has horror aspects, but it's actually trying to address certain issues. It's got a point to make. Tends to be a little bit more artistic, and although it may have like high levels of gore, there is a purpose behind that gore beyond the visceral. Flower of Flesh and Blood is a weird film. He doesn't seem to want the girl to feel pain. The guinea pig films were bizarre, but particularly the first two. Although the second one, Devil's Experiment, is certainly one of those. It's one of those films that you can understand a bit more. In fact, actually, probably true. Devil's Experiment as well. Flowers of Flesh and Blood and Devil's Experiment. They're both kind of like got a sort of foot in the Japanese kind of culture in terms of some of the manga kind of things, particularly. Flowers of Flesh and Blood. Yeah, that's the right one. I was just trying to make sure I got it right. Hideshi Hino, who plays the surgeon. If you ever look at some of his stuff, in fact, give me 2 seconds. It's funny enough, talking about that. There we go. Hideshi Hino. I've got about like 3 or 4 of these, and essentially it's kind of it's manga, and it has this sort of corruption of the body kind of vibe going on. Of course, being but you can sort of see, hopefully, that there's a lot of kind of, the same kind of focus on damage and stuff like that to the body being broken down and corrupted by rot and all sorts of stuff, which carries over into something like The Devil's Experiment and Flowers of Flesh and Blood, that kind of stuff. It's actually quite fascinating, the Japanese psyche when it comes to that kind of stuff. Is quite fascinating. It goes back, generations, and yet still they tend to be, kind of like in sort of public life a lot more kind of relaxed about that stuff. But obviously, post World War II, Japan became a pacifist nation, and it is something that they're potentially having to change a little bit lately because of various sort of geopolitical pressures. Though at least Zombie at least tried to do something with Halloween. Yeah, it's fair enough. I think it did not do a damn thing for me. I've always said the problem with Zombie for me, Rob Zombie, is less about kind of what he shows than it is about the writing. I don't think he's a terribly good writer, especially when it comes to characters. Characters are kind of important to me, and they always have been. You can get away with a lot in a film if you kind of have well-written characters. But when it comes to something like the Firefly family, for instance, the Devil's Rejects, you get the first half of the film where they're just utter psychopathic bastards. Then on a dime, we're expected to kind of almost root for them, and it's this sort of emotional blackmail that happened with the music and music choices and all that kind of stuff. Or at least that's how I felt about it. Did not kind of work for me. I have a few manga like that myself. Yeah, some of it's fascinating. I mean, by all means, kind of like on the Ramblaholics, I'd be interested in if you've got kind of ideas about other versions, kind of like maybe not the Hideshi Hino's stuff, for instance, but similar kind of things. Let's start a thread on Ramblaholics would be kind of fun. Still on the weird supernatural rural horror subgenre, but forgotten its name. Folk horror, yeah. Apparently based it on his early childhood, almost being murdered as a child in 1940s China. Yeah. Pagan rituals out in the countryside. Yeah, that's definitely folk horror. I quite like a bit of folk horror because it's sort of like the aliens within sort of thing. You know, when you get something like The Wicker Man, for instance, you got all these kind of people who are, you know, recognisably your country folk, but they're so alien in terms of sensibilities, which is quite disturbing. I haven't seen The Wicker Tree. I agree. Rob Zombie could make a great film from somebody else's script. I think that's potentially the case. I think Rob Zombie is a very interesting visual style. I think he's very good at that kind of stuff. As long as I think he ought to have a co-director as well to sort of help steer through some of that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's just when it comes to the writing. It doesn't jive with me. All his characters seem to be specifically designed to be detestable, which is, you know, fine in certain respects, but don't ask me to feel for them. But at that point, you've also, you know, it sort of descends into this kind of, why are we watching this? You know, just watching these terrible, terrible people tear themselves to pieces. Zombie also worsens out Halloween movies in his director's cuts. The theatrical cuts seem to be superior, but hella hard to track down. I've not really watched the two different cuts enough to be able to compare, but it's an interesting point of view. It won't be the first time. The country exists to remind you how great living in the city is. I like to be sort of like, you know, within touch of civilization, but I do not want. I hate living in big cities. Where I live now is technically a city, but it's very small. Oh God, I keep hitting that fucking mic. Apologies for that. After the Munsters, I doubt he'll get another opportunity soon. I don't know. He seems to, and you know, and a fair play to him. He seems to keep getting work. He seems to keep getting work, and I'm not going to begrudge the guy. I was a big fan of his music, particularly the White Zombie days. But when he came into sort of film making, said, "Right, I'm doing a horror film," I was like, "Oh, well, that'd be cool," because, you know, he seems to be very, very kind of up on that stuff. He understands it. At least he certainly references enough of it in his music. But yeah. Imprint are releasing Zombies cuts soon, Kieran. If you're looking for them, releasing next month, I think. Okay. Get another can. Oh boy. Can't believe I've got to go back to work on Monday. I am very fortunate actually over summer, because I say fortunate, I sort of plan it really. I give myself like 3-day weeks over summer, generally speaking, but the first week is a bit different because I've got to be in Monday. So hopefully we'll be able to do a few more streams along the way, stuff like that. Hi Lampy, curious about your thoughts on Black Mirror. I've only watched a couple. Not a lot of them. I thought they were interesting. Kind of like a modern Tales of the Unexpected, but sort of with a more kind of cultural twist, I guess. But Black Mirror, yeah, interesting. It's funny, you know, TV seems to be a lot more adventurous with these ideas, and that partly that's because we've got streaming services and things like that who are willing to pump money into stuff like that, at least to a certain extent. I am kind of glad that, you know, a lot of the streaming services, when they make stuff like this, they do still eventually kick them out on DVD or Blu-ray, something like that. Because we're starting to, find, particularly with going back to the French Connection thing, that people who rely on these things being available either for streaming or they've got a digital copy that you can buy, like you can through Amazon Prime, that kind of stuff, that these things aren't secure. Has anyone if anyone's bought the French Connection before they decided to have this edited version, has that been changed? Because that's the risk, is like the version that you got is not the version you're necessarily going to have in a year's time. And that's a problem. That is a massive problem. The other thing is that people don't think about is not only can the companies sort of disappear, but every film that they have on a streaming service costs money, right? People go, oh, it was so much cheaper just to have it digitally, for the companies, because they don't have to press a CD and stuff. They press a CD or a Blu-ray or DVD, something like that. Once it's out the door, it's out the door. They don't have to worry about it. You've bought it, you've got it. It's now the problem for the customer. When it's digital, they've got to constantly look after servers, which are constantly going to be getting fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller as their catalogues get bigger. And eventually you're going to end up with a whole bunch of films that barely anybody's watching. But that film is still taking up space on the server and it's costing you money. Because it has to be accessible 24 hours a day. Right? Across the world. So, not only is there physical media that it's stored on within the server, it's also the electricity. So ultimately, you can argue very convincingly that a Blu-ray, DVDs, CDs and stuff like that are more ecologically viable because they don't take any power to store. There's no juice running through these things when they're sat on my shelf. And hoodies or chavs make better revenge films rather than horror baddies. To me, they have no charm like classic horror characters, but they're perfect for Harry Brown. When it comes to characters and kind of like bad guys, good guys, whatever, you can get sort of stock characters, I guess, which are a lot less interesting in and of themselves. In some respects, some of those characters that are uninteresting now may be a lot more interesting in about 20 years' time. Just because of the cultural context and all that kind of stuff. Times change, it's interesting to see what's going on, some time ago. I think it's like kind of like you had like Mods and the Rockers films with those characters in. At the time, it would have been like these guys just seem like they're assholes. They're the kind of people that cause us all sorts of grief and give the police a hard time. But now you look back at it and you sort of go, it's an interesting part of society that has changed significantly. Do you think there'll be a Blu-ray revival with those issues of storage? I think people are gonna become a little bit more aware. I think that's kind of important. The biggest part of the problem is, and it's a problem any collector has, a society now has kind of driven a lot of people into very small places. We're living in these fucking rabbit hutches half the time. Very, very small places with very little room for storage. We're told that minimalism is the way to go, that digital storage is helps keep the clutter down and all that kind of stuff. And, there's compelling things towards that. But it's becoming harder to be able to sort of have things. The expectations are very different of people. You're not supposed to collect a load of stuff because otherwise You know, you get chucked out of your rental place and it makes it a lot harder to move and all that kind of stuff. Or the tiny little place that you're in is going to be filled up before you know it, and that kind of stuff. You know, there are those kind of pressures, which are wider than just sort of film appreciation, keeping hold of media and stuff like that. But it is one level of it. I think the first time that anything major goes down, and it will happen, it could be Netflix, it could be Amazon Prime. They might just turn around and go, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. All sorts of things can change, but it'll take one major hit, and I think people start to kind of realise the question is less, will people be willing, as much as it is, will the rights holders, the studios and the likes, allow it to continue? Because they're very keen to keep it all digital online. Because then you don't own it, they own it. And they can do what the fuck they want. And if there's a version they want to change, they can change it and you've got no comeback. If they decide that they just don't want a film to exist anymore, or can't be asked to have it exist anymore, or can't afford for it to exist anymore, it will just go away. And you'll have no say in the matter. If everything's digital, it's very, very vulnerable. It can go away completely. But yeah, the guy who was the cinematographer on F taught me at uni. Tom Siddell is the director is from Cambridge. Yeah. I hope people start sort of coming back to it, and to some extent, it's as much to do with driving interest in physical media and making people feel a bit more invested in it. They've been convinced years and years and years of being told that, oh, no, we're going to go digital. So much more convenient. I have to say, I don't look for my digital collection nearly as much as I will look through this stuff. There is something about having the stuff physically there and sort of having a wander around it. Just kind of makes you a bit more encouraged to revisit things. Whereas you have it all on kind of, I don't know, Amazon Prime, you have 500 titles on Amazon Prime, chances are you're going to forget that half that shit's there. Digital storage is fine until you drop your external hard drive and the contents become unreadable. Yes, so you leave your USB stick in your pocket and it goes in the washing machine. I think the biggest thing is, unless they're very careful, they can lose massive swaths of film history, or at least not have the originals, whatever that means when it comes to digital. You can lose all that kind of stuff in a heartbeat. You get some hacker decides they're going to delete the entirety of the Paramount back catalogue. Now, hopefully, you would imagine that they would have all the copies that they need to safeguard against that, but historically, that's not always been the case. They've had, vaults go up in flames because of the nitrous celluloid spontaneously combusting, and lost the entire history of a number of titles. God, glad for a beer. It's getting hot in here. It's not too bad, I guess. It's not quite so humid tonight, which is really quite nice. Having a physical collection is the only collection that counts. Yeah, I split between, I do have digital stuff. I do occasionally buy stuff on digital. Most of the time that's just for convenience, but it's always the case that if there's anything that I kind of think is important enough, or kind of I want enough, that I will try to get the physical media version of it. The digital catalogue, it'd be annoying if it goes away, but I won't lose my shit about it. It would just be that kind of, I might kick off a little bit. But, stuff like this. Right? Okay, so I picked up that a few weeks ago. Father Ted. It's like the entire series. When I picked that up, it was on Prime for free, right? So I could just watch the episodes at any point, but I still wanted to get hold of the DVDs, which is just as well, because by the time I got around to actually sort of receiving that and watching it, they stopped showing them on Prime for free. Then you have to go buy it digital. Digital is a rental model only. Yes, it is essentially. Yeah, you've got no real rights when it comes to digital. You don't own it because it's not on your computer, or it's not in your possession. Secondly, internet goes down. You've got no access to it either. Proper preservation conditions, please, people. Yes. I love the collecting experience. I love admiring director's collection as a physical work of art. For me, having collections on the shelf is a personal sign of respect I feel for the work. Yeah. I think that's perfectly fair enough. And posters and physical media are a reminder that you can create too, just like your heroes. They did so, why can't you? Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I mean, it's like with my writing and stuff like that. You spend years and years sort of writing scripts and analysis and all that kind of stuff. But it's nothing quite like when it gets actually published. I mean, not just on a website. Not that that's invalid, but there's something about holding a copy of your work in a publication in your hand, which is kind of cool. Father Ted is great. Yes, it is. Yeah, I hear you're a racist now, Father. Ah, dear. You can still watch Father Ted because of New Grey Line and no longer makes money out of it. I didn't know that, but to be honest, I've not really sort of looked into what he did. I know he was embroiled in a lot of controversy. Father Ted is an absolute classic. Sometimes I don't know. I think it is one of those cases where I can enjoy the series despite him. There are times when that's not possible. I mean, you couldn't really watch. There's certain things I'd struggle to watch because of the person involved with it. That can be very difficult. I wouldn't want to go see the new Flash film with Ezra Miller, for instance. Well, partly because it's a DC film and most of them suck. I know, controversial, but that's just my opinion. But the idea of watching that film with all the baggage that guy's carrying, kind of weird. And so come the big the tsunami of Father Ted quotes, which is fair enough. It's eminently quotable. My friend at work is just such a huge fan. He's from Donegal, so I occasionally put on my really, really bad Irish accent. Sure, what I know, from Donegal. But he's a massive, massive fan, understandably so. It's kind of an interesting one in some respects because it is so relentlessly kind of poking fun at the Catholic Church, and of course that's a sacred institution in Ireland. But there is a certain amount of referential kind of humour when it comes to the Irish, particularly. Be hard to watch the Cosby Show now, even though I grew up with it. I think as much as anything, it's because he was so kind of like up his own arse about being very pure and, I don't swear and this and that and the other, wholesome comedy and all that kind of stuff. That now when you see him, and particularly because he's up front and centre in that, whereas Glenn Lynham wasn't really kind of up front and centre in Father Ted, he's a writer. seeing someone like Cosby is like kind of very, very uncomfortable these days. And I think, you know, some of the kind of like the times that he berates sort of fellow black comedians and stuff because they'd swear and stuff like that. You go, well, now you're looking at it, you go, well, what were you doing at the time? Fascists dress in black and tell people what to do, whereas priests. Yes. Oh dear. But, just a quick check, see if I missed anything. Ministry was much better than White Zombie, I felt. I enjoyed White Zombie. Didn't take much for it to kind of implode down. And, you know, that was Rob Zombie kind of like wanting to go off and do his own thing, which is more of the same, really. But, yeah, I mean, there was a real kind of to and fro about that stuff. Nothing Graham's done is in any way comparable to Bill Cosby. No, he just had kind of like shitty opinions, didn't he? From what I understand. Bill Cosby was, you know, very, very nasty. It's the same sort of thing as like the idea of watching old Jim will fix it episodes and stuff like that, you know. Very, very difficult. And another one which would be Rolf Harris, who, you know, he recently shuffled off his mortal coil. Watching anything with him in these days would be deeply, deeply uncomfortable because they did actual crimes. Just not nice people. Whether you agree with him or not, he's not comparable to an actual rapist, no. No, like I say, he's not even like up front and centre on this thing. It's kind of like, you know, he's the writer, it's in the background, doing his thing, and certainly with the material of Father Ted, it doesn't even kind of come anywhere close to sort of addressing those kind of things. It doesn't try to forward political agendas in that sort of respect. Well, Philip Schofield, that was a little overbaked with Philip Schofield from what I can tell. Well, I don't know too much, because to be quite honest, a lot of that sort of stuff I just completely tune out. Just as much as I would with like kind of Harry and Meghan. The second I see them kind of like in the news headlines, it's like just not interested, like no more than I am with any of the other royals / ex-royals. I think the only one that was kind of like amusing to follow was Randy Andy. And that's just to see him dig himself into a deeper hole. It's very rare to see a royal doing that level of physical labour. To quote Compton the gang, he bummed that runner. Okay. True, compared to the hoodies of today, ironic, the class 1994 was about what thugs would be like in the future, as it was made a few years earlier than 1984. Yeah. I don't know why my brain has sort of gone on pause when it comes to that, but there you go. What's going on? Okay. Anyway, I think probably we shall call it a night at that point. I'm getting hot. I've run out of things to say off the top of my head. We've had a good solid, well, just about 2 hours. Technical issues aside, unless anybody's got something else that they want to touch upon, we will kind of look at bringing it to a close. Always used to appreciate 2000 AD for having a glimpse into a possible future. It was surprisingly interesting comic book, or graphic novel if you want to go that way. I don't still call it a comic book. I think comic books are perfectly legitimate. Yeah, I don't remember anything with that level of sort of integrity towards its story. Even when you're talking Marvel and DC, and they had their moments and stuff, at 2000 AD was one of those that really kind of it took itself seriously, very seriously. I think the other ones sort of took a little bit longer. Potential watch along next time. You have a suggestion or two. Well, we'll have to see, but by all means, put a suggestion in for that. But absolutely, it was in the UK the other day and bought an issue of 2000 AD. Oh, is it still going? I had no idea. But yeah, we'll call it a night there. Thank you for sticking with me at the beginning with the potential with the technical issues that went on. These things happen, especially when I've been away for a while and I've reset my system and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully it will be a bit smoother next time. Now that everything seems to be kind of settled down. So I will say, have a lovely weekend. Might do one next weekend. We'll have to see how things are going. Yeah, we'll try and do one next weekend. So yeah, get that suggestion in, Kieran, and we'll see. We'll have a look at potentially doing a watch along next time. Late to the party. Great seeing you. It's great seeing you again as well. But yeah, good night, folks, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I'll see you soon. Night night.